values we stand for. That's what my administration intends to stand for. All right? Thank you very much, everybody.
If you were waiting to hear a U.S. president say, "I feel your pain," or if you were waiting to hear a U.S. president say, "It's them or us," that is not what you just heard. President Obama called the attacks here in Paris a setback at one point. He was asked, "Is it time for you to change your strategy?" More or less, he said no. "Have you underestimated the abilities of ISIS?" More or less, he said no. "Do you understand how to defeat ISIS?" His response: "This is a variation of the same question." President Obama has made it quite clear in that Q&A that lasted more than 45 minutes that he has accepted there are evils in this world and evils in places like Paris, France, and this is something that we all must face today. It's a reality in which the world we live. If you're at home wondering, with your own set of anger and your own set of fears about what could happen next, you are not alone, because that's precisely what you feel here in Paris, France. And if you're waiting for clarification on your feelings through that Q&A, you weren't going to get it. The president's strategy, as stated over the weekend, continues as is. Bret Baier hosts a special report with me now. And Bret, you were listening. Your impressions from Turkey a moment ago.
Well, Bill, I tell you, this was striking. This was truly striking that the president, first of all, he started, and he obviously thanked his Turkish hosts. It took him about a minute to get into the attacks of Paris. He talked about cyber talks and climate change, and then talked about the Paris attacks. You're right. He said the strategy is essentially not changing. He was asked numerous times about whether he personally underestimated ISIS. Remember calling them JV. Just last week doing an interview that said that they were contained on the ground in Syria and Iraq, and he pushed back and even seemed angry at some of those questions, he said, being similar. The problem was he never conceded that there was any misjudgment by his administration. And the big passion that you heard from the president was about refugees and how the U.S. has to continue to realize that there are men and women and children escaping terrorism. Meantime, across town, you have French President François Hollande talking to his Congress, starting with France is at war. ISIS cannot be contained. ISIS has to be destroyed, asking his Congress to establish 3 more weeks of an emergency session, emergency declaration of powers to enable him to go after ISIS in every way, shape, and form. So the contrast in those two speeches, obviously one a news conference at a summit and the other an address to Congress, but still the message, the contrast in tone and urgency was striking. Bill?
If you have people willing to die, it's hard to stop them. That's what the president said. Talked about a handful of people carrying out these attacks. In this country alone, you have 1,000 men who have gone to Iraq or Syria to join the Islamic State. That's a lot more than a handful. And he talked repeatedly and with deference and with tenderness in this comment, Bret, about his trips to Walter Reed. And the U.S. military has paid one hell of a price for 14 years, and many of them for the rest of their lives. You used to work at the Pentagon. You know what the U.S. military would say when they heard something like that. Put us in the fight.
Yes,
we can
exactly.
do it.
Listen, Bill,
don't send a 20-year-old French woman or young man to a concert on a Friday night and expect them to pay the price for the lack of security. Men and women in the U.S. military are ready and willing to pick up this fight. And that, Bret, as you well know, is an extraordinary thing on behalf of our country.
It is. Listen, I talked to a special ops commander who's engaged currently, and there is this palpable frustration. Unleash them. Make them go after this threat. The president talks about the costs and the treasure that we've spent both in blood and treasure, but arguably there is a sense that something else has to be done. Bill?
A setback is the phrase used for here in Paris. Back here in a moment. I'm going to get back to my colleague Martha MacCallum in New York for more.